The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday afternoon, turning Fifth Avenue into a river of umbrellas and honking taxis. Marcus Ashford stood under the awning of his favorite coffee shop, watching the chaos unfold while his driver circled the block for the third time. He ducked inside to escape a particularly aggressive journalist who'd been hounding him about his latest real estate acquisition, a historic building in Brooklyn that preservationists wanted saved and developers wanted demolished. At 38, Marcus had built an empire worth over $3 billion, but lately every victory felt hollow. 6 months. That's how long it had been since the divorce papers were finalized. 6 months since Victoria had walked out of their penthouse with nothing but her personal belongings and her pride. She'd refused his offer of a settlement, refused the apartment in Tribeca, refused everything except her freedom. The memory still burned, not with anger but with something far more complicated. Marcus checked his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe that had belonged to his grandfather, and decided to make a run for it. The rain was letting up slightly, and he had a meeting at 4 that he couldn't miss. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, nearly colliding with a woman who was struggling to open her umbrella while balancing 2 grocery bags. "I'm so sorry," he started, reaching out to steady her bags. Then he froze. The woman looked up, her honey-colored eyes widening in recognition, and something that looked like fear. Victoria, his ex-wife, but not the Victoria he remembered. This woman had the same delicate features, the same way of tucking her dark hair behind her ear when she was nervous, but there was something profoundly different. She was pregnant, very pregnant. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. His eyes dropped to her rounded belly, clearly visible beneath her rain-dampened coat, then back to her face. Victoria's cheeks flushed red, and she took a step backward, nearly dropping one of her bags. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely audible over the traffic, I didn't expect to see you here. You're pregnant." The words came out before he could stop them, flat and accusatory in a way he hadn't intended. Victoria's hand moved protectively to her stomach. "Yes, how far along?" "That's really none of your business anymore." Her voice had found its strength, that familiar steel he'd both loved and hated during their marriage. Marcus's mind was racing, doing calculations he didn't want to do. They'd been divorced for 6 months, separated for 2 months before that, 8 months total. If she was as far along as she looked, 5, maybe 6 months, then the timing was impossible, except it wasn't impossible at all. It was perfectly, devastatingly possible, but that couldn't be right. Victoria was infertile. They'd spent 3 years trying to conceive, 3 years of specialists and tests and treatments that left them both emotionally bankrupt. The diagnosis had been clear: severe endometriosis, damaged fallopian tubes, less than a 2% chance of natural conception. The doctors had recommended IVF, but after 2 failed rounds that cost them a fortune and nearly destroyed what was left of their marriage, they'd given up. The infertility had been the beginning of the end. Not because Marcus blamed Victoria, he'd never blamed her, but because the weight of that loss had crushed something fundamental between them. They'd started as lovers who couldn't keep their hands off each other, who laughed at inside jokes and finished each other's sentences. By the end, they were strangers sharing a bed, polite and careful and desperately unhappy. "This is crazy," Marcus said, his voice rough. "The doctors said you couldn't." "I know what the doctors said." Victoria shifted her bags, her jaw set in that stubborn way he remembered too well. "I was there for every appointment, every test, every failure. I know exactly what they said." "Then how—" He gestured helplessly at her stomach. "Miracles happen, Marcus, or maybe the doctors were wrong. Does it matter?" She looked past him, scanning the street. "I really need to go." "Wait." He reached for her arm, then thought better of it. "Victoria, please, if this baby is— if there's any chance—" "There's no chance," she said sharply. "This baby has nothing to do with you." The words hit him like a physical blow. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "You're seeing someone." It wasn't a question. Victoria's expression shifted, became guarded in a way that told him everything he needed to know. Of course she was seeing someone. She was beautiful, intelligent, kind. Why wouldn't she have moved on? 6 months was plenty of time to meet someone new, fall in love, start a family. The family she'd always wanted. The family she couldn't have with him, except they hadn't divorced because they stopped loving each other. They'd divorced because the weight of wanting something they couldn't have had poisoned everything else. Marcus had suggested it after their second IVF failure, during one of those careful, rational conversations they'd become so good at having. They could adopt, he'd said. They could use a surrogate. But Victoria had looked at him with tears streaming down her face and said she couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep failing, couldn't keep disappointing him, couldn't keep living in the shadow of the children they'd never have. He'd let her go because he loved her, because watching her break herself apart over something neither of them could control was more painful than losing her. Or so he'd told himself at 3 a.m. when he couldn't sleep, alone in their enormous bed. "I'm happy for you," Marcus managed. The lie tasted bitter. "Really? I hope everything goes well." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Thank you, that's kind of you to say. Will you tell me if you need anything? Not money," he added quickly when her eyes flashed. "I know you don't want that, but if there's anything else, please." She studied him for a long moment, and Marcus wondered what she saw. Did she see the man she'd once loved, or just a painful reminder of everything they'd lost? Did she think about their marriage at all, or had she packed those memories away in a box labeled mistake and moved on? "I should go," Victoria said finally. "Take care of yourself, Marcus." She walked away without looking back, her pregnant silhouette disappearing into the crowd of afternoon shoppers and office workers heading home. Marcus stood frozen on the sidewalk, rain beginning to fall harder again, soaking through his expensive suit jacket. His phone buzzed. His assistant, reminding him about the 4 o'clock meeting. He texted back that something had come up, that he needed to reschedule, then flagged down a taxi. He gave the driver his address and sat back, staring unseeing out the window as Manhattan blurred past. Victoria was pregnant. After years of being told it was impossible, after their marriage had crumbled under the weight of that impossibility, she was going to have a baby with someone else. The timing gnawed at him. 6 months pregnant, maybe. Which meant she'd gotten pregnant right around the time of the divorce, maybe even before. Had she been seeing this other man while they were still married? Had she lied about the infertility? No. That was paranoid and cruel. Victoria wasn't a liar. She'd been devastated by their inability to conceive, had blamed herself even when he'd told her 1,000 times that it wasn't her fault. But then how? How was this possible? Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Dr. Patricia Morrison, the fertility specialist who'd treated them. He started to dial, then stopped. What was he going to say? "My ex-wife is mysteriously pregnant. Please explain." It was none of his business anymore. Victoria had made that clear. This baby had nothing to do with him, except he couldn't shake the feeling that it had everything to do with him. The taxi pulled up to his building, and Marcus paid the driver without really registering the amount. He rode the elevator to the penthouse in silence, nodding absently at his doorman. Inside, the apartment felt cavernous and empty. Victoria's touches were long gone. The colourful throw pillows, the plants she'd loved, the photographs of their travels together. He'd redecorated in sleek, modern minimalism. Everything was grey and chrome and perfectly tasteful. It looked like a hotel. Marcus poured himself a scotch and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably arriving home, putting away her groceries, maybe talking to her new boyfriend about the awkward encounter with her ex-husband, maybe laughing about it, or maybe not laughing at all. He thought about the look on her face when she'd seen him. Not just surprise, but fear, and the way her hand had moved protectively to her stomach, as if shielding the baby from him. From what? What did she think he would do? Unless there was something she wasn't telling him, something about this pregnancy that she didn't want him to know. Marcus drained his scotch and made a decision. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to start. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the play of headlights from the street below create shifting patterns across the white expanse. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Victoria's face, the fear, the defensiveness, the way she'd protected her belly as if he were a threat. At 6 a.m, he gave up on sleep and went to his home office. He had files there, stored in a locked cabinet that he'd never quite gotten around to clearing out. Medical records from their fertility treatments. He pulled them out now, spreading them across his desk, reading through reports he'd tried to forget. Dr. Morrison's notes were thorough and clinical. severe endometriosis, bilateral tubal damage, multiple failed ovulation induction cycles, 2 failed IVF attempts. The prognosis had been clear. Natural conception was highly unlikely, and even with assisted reproductive technology, their chances were poor. Victoria's condition was chronic and progressive. The doctor had recommended moving to donor eggs or surrogacy. Marcus remembered that conversation. It had taken place in Dr. Morrison's office on a grey February morning, almost 2 years ago. Victoria had sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, while the doctor delivered the news. Afterward, in the car, she'd finally broken down, sobbing so hard she'd made herself sick. Marcus had held her while she cried, feeling helpless and furious at a situation neither of them could control. They'd tried IVF anyway, twice. Both times Victoria had endured weeks of hormone injections that left her bloated and emotional. Both times they'd waited with desperate hope for the pregnancy test. Both times it had been negative. The second failure had happened 14 months ago. A week later, Victoria had moved into the guest room. 2 months after that, Marcus had suggested the divorce. He picked up his phone and called Dr. Morrison's office, leaving a message with the answering service. Then he showered, dressed, and went through the motions of his morning routine, though nothing felt real. At 9 o'clock, his assistant called to confirm his rescheduled meetings. At 9:30, Dr. Morrison called back. "Marcus, I was surprised to get your message," she said. Her voice was warm but professional. "How are you doing?" "I need to ask you something about Victoria's condition," he said without preamble. "Is there any way the diagnosis could have been wrong? Any chance she could conceive naturally?" There was a pause. "Has something happened?" "I saw her yesterday. She's pregnant, very pregnant. I'd estimate 5 or 6 months along." Another pause, longer this time. "That's unexpected, but not impossible. Medical diagnoses aren't absolute, Marcus. There's always a margin of error, however small, and the human body can be unpredictable." "I've seen cases where—" "What's the probability?" he interrupted. "Realistically, based on Victoria's specific case, less than 1% for natural conception, but that's not zero. Spontaneous pregnancy in women with severe endometriosis does occur, though it's rare. Sometimes the condition improves on its own. Sometimes stress reduction plays a role. Sometimes we simply don't understand why it happens. Could the stress of our marriage have been preventing it? Could the divorce have somehow made it possible?" Dr. Morrison finished gently. "It's a theory. Chronic stress does impact fertility. But I don't want to give you false hope or false guilt, Marcus. If Victoria is pregnant, it could be natural conception, or it could be that she pursued IVF with another clinic, or used donor eggs, or any number of scenarios. Have you asked her?" "She says the baby isn't mine." "Then perhaps you should respect that." Marcus ended the call feeling no better than before. He tried to focus on work. He had a conference call about the Brooklyn development at 11, but his mind kept wandering. Finally, at noon, he did something he wasn't proud of. He called his head of security, a former detective named Robert Chen. "I need you to look into something for me," Marcus said, discreetly. "Of course, Mr. Ashford. What do you need?" "Information on my ex-wife, Victoria Ashford. She went back to her maiden name, Victoria Hart. Where she's living, where she's working, who she's been seeing." He paused, hating himself. "I need to know about the father of her baby." "Understood. I'll have something for you by end of day." Marcus hung up and immediately felt sick. This was wrong. He was invading Victoria's privacy, crossing boundaries that had no business being crossed. But he needed to know. The timing was too coincidental. The pregnancy too impossible. Something wasn't adding up. The rest of the day dragged by in a blur of meetings and phone calls that Marcus barely registered. At 6 o'clock, Robert Chen appeared at his office door with a tablet and a troubled expression. "That was fast," Marcus said. "The basic information was easy to find," Chen said carefully, "but there are some complications." "Show me." Chen set the tablet on the desk. "Victoria is living in a modest apartment in Brooklyn. She's been working as a freelance grant writer, primarily for non-profit organizations. Financial records show she's been living very simply. No expensive purchases, no trips, no indication of support from a partner." "What about the father?" Chen hesitated. "That's the complication. There's no indication that she's been in a relationship. No social media presence showing a partner. No one entering or leaving her apartment regularly, except for a neighbor who brings her groceries occasionally, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson. No credit card charges for dinners out. No shared expenses. No evidence of anyone else being involved in her life. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. That doesn't make sense. She's 6 months pregnant. Someone's the father. I contacted a few of her friends, very carefully, posed as a journalist, doing a piece on her non-profit work. They all said the same thing. Victoria's been keeping to herself since the divorce. One friend mentioned she seemed different a few months ago, said she was glowing and seemed happier, but Victoria wouldn't talk about why. Another said Victoria had mentioned something about a miracle, but wouldn't elaborate. A miracle, Marcus repeated slowly. Chen cleared his throat. There's one more thing. I pulled her medical records. Don't ask me how. She's been seeing an obstetrician at Mount Sinai. According to the notes I could access, this is a healthy, natural pregnancy. No indication of IVF, no complications so far. The baby is due in approximately 12 weeks. Marcus did the math. 12 weeks from now would put her at 9 months, which meant she was currently about 6 months along, which meant she'd gotten pregnant roughly 7 months ago, which meant... 7 months ago, we were still married, Marcus said quietly. We were separated, but still married. Chen said nothing, but his expression was knowing. Is there anything else in those records? Any indication of paternity? No paternity test has been ordered, but Chen tapped the screen, bringing up a scanned document. This is from her first prenatal visit about 5 months ago. The intake form asks about the father's medical history. Victoria left it blank except for one section. Under how was conception achieved, she wrote, natural, spontaneous pregnancy after years of infertility. Marcus stared at the words until they blurred. Spontaneous pregnancy, years of infertility. She was talking about their infertility, about the years they'd spent trying to conceive. Mr. Ashford, Chen said carefully, is there any possibility this child is yours? We were separated, Marcus said, but his mind was racing back to 7 months ago, February. They'd been living in the same apartment still, though barely speaking. The divorce papers had been drawn up, but not yet filed. They'd been trying to figure out how to divide their lives, and it had been awful and exhausting. And then, one night, Victoria had come home late from a friend's birthday party. She'd been drinking, not drunk, but loose and sad and beautiful, in a way that had broken his heart. They'd started talking, really talking for the first time in months, about what had gone wrong, about what they'd lost, about how much they'd loved each other before everything fell apart. One thing had led to another. They'd ended up in bed together, desperate and tender and sad all at once. In the morning, Victoria had been gone. She'd left a note saying it had been a mistake, that it couldn't happen again, that they needed to move forward with the divorce. A week later, she'd moved out completely. Marcus had tried not to think about that night. It had felt like a goodbye, a final moment of connection before they became strangers. But now, Jesus, he whispered, it could be mine. What do you want me to do? Chen asked. Marcus stood up abruptly, grabbing his coat. Nothing. This is done. Delete whatever files you made. Forget I asked. Sir, I mean it, Robert. This stays between us, and it ends here. Chen nodded slowly and left. Marcus stood alone in his office, his heart pounding. If there was even a chance this baby was his, he needed to talk to Victoria, but she'd been so adamant that it wasn't. She'd said it had nothing to do with him. Why would she lie? Unless she didn't know. Unless she'd been with someone else too, and assumed the baby belonged to the other man. Or unless she knew perfectly well the baby was Marcus's, and she was trying to protect it from him. From the life he led. From being the child of a billionaire who was constantly in the public eye. Or maybe she just didn't want him back in her life at all. Marcus grabbed his keys and headed for the elevator. He had Victoria's address now. He would go to her apartment and they would talk, and she would tell him the truth. Whatever it was, he could handle it. He had to know. The drive to Brooklyn took 40 minutes in evening traffic. Marcus parked illegally on Victoria's street and sat in his car for a few minutes, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he got out and walked to her building, a pre-war walk-up with a slightly shabby entrance. He found her name on the buzzer and pressed it. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. She's not home. The voice came from behind him. Marcus turned to see an elderly woman with a shopping cart, watching him with sharp, suspicious eyes. "And if you're here to bother her, you can just leave now." "I'm not here to bother her," Marcus said. I'm a friend." "Do you know when she'll be back?" The woman, Mrs. Patterson, he guessed, looked him up and down, taking in his expensive suit and watch. "Friend, huh? Funny, she's never mentioned you, and she's mentioned being very careful about who she lets into her life these days. My name is Marcus Ashford, I'm her ex-husband." Recognition flickered in the woman's eyes, followed by something that looked like anger. "Oh, you're the one who broke her heart." The words stung more than they should have. "Is she okay? Please, I just need to know she's all right." Mrs. Patterson studied him for a long moment. Finally, she said, "She's at the hospital, Mount Sinai. She went into early labor this afternoon." Marcus's heart stopped. "Early labor? But she's only 6 months." 28 weeks, Mrs. Patterson said sharply. "The baby's too early. They called an ambulance around 3 o'clock. I wanted to go with her, but she insisted she'd be fine alone." The elderly woman's voice cracked slightly. "That girl is always alone, always insisting she's fine when she's clearly not." Marcus was already moving toward his car. "Which entrance? Emergency?" "Labor and delivery, 5th floor," Mrs. Patterson called after him. "And you tell her Doris is coming as soon as my daughter can drive me there." The drive back to Manhattan was a blur of honking horns and red lights that Marcus barely registered. His mind was stuck on one terrifying fact. 28 weeks was dangerously premature. Babies could survive at that gestation, but they faced serious complications. Respiratory problems, developmental delays, weeks or months in the NICU. Victoria must be terrified. He abandoned his car with the valet at Mount Sinai's main entrance and ran to the elevators. The 5th floor was quieter than he expected. Soft lighting, muted colors, the antiseptic smell that all hospitals shared. He approached the nurse's station, trying to catch his breath. "I'm looking for Victoria Hart," he said. "She was brought in this afternoon in premature labor." The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, checked her computer. "Are you family?" "I'm her husband." The lie came automatically, and he didn't correct it. "Is she okay? Is the baby—" "She's stable. The doctors managed to stop the contractions with medication. Ms. Hart is on bed rest and being monitored closely." The nurse studied him more carefully. "She didn't have you listed as an emergency contact. She actually didn't list anyone." "We're separated," Marcus admitted. "It's complicated, but please, I need to see her, even if it's just for a moment." The nurse's expression softened. "Room 517. But if she asks you to leave, you leave. Stress is the last thing she needs right now." Marcus found the room with shaking hands. The door was partially open, and he could see Victoria in the bed, propped up on pillows, one hand resting on her belly. She looked small and exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. An IV ran into her arm, and she was connected to multiple monitors that beeped softly. He knocked gently on the doorframe. Victoria's eyes flew open, and when she saw him, her expression went through a rapid series of changes: surprise, fear, anger, and finally, resignation. "How did you know I was here?" Her voice was hoarse. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson." Marcus took a hesitant step into the room. "She said you went into early labor." "Victoria, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Is the baby—" "We're both fine. The contractions stopped. I'm on medication and strict bed rest." She looked away from him. "You shouldn't be here, Marcus. I know. But I couldn't stay away. Not when I heard you were in the hospital." He moved closer, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "Victoria, we need to talk. About the baby. About the timing. There's nothing to talk about." 7 months ago, Marcus said quietly. "February. One night before you moved out. Do you remember?" Victoria's face went pale. "That was a mistake, a moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't it? Because I've been doing the math and the timing lines up perfectly. This baby could be mine." "Could be isn't is," Victoria said, but her voice wavered. "I told you. You told me it had nothing to do with me, but you didn't say it wasn't mine." Marcus leaned forward. "Look at me and tell me the truth. Is this my child?" For a long moment, Victoria said nothing. Then, to Marcus's shock, tears began sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know," she whispered. "I honestly don't know." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the chest. What do you mean you don't know? Victoria wiped at her tears angrily. After you suggested the divorce, after I moved into the guest room, I was so angry. Angry at you, at myself, at God or the universe or whoever decided I couldn't have children. I started going out more, trying to convince myself I could have a life without you, without the family we'd dreamed about. She took a shaky breath. I met someone, a doctor at one of the charity fundraisers I was helping organize. His name was David. We went on a few dates. He was kind and funny, and he didn't know anything about my medical history or my failed marriage. He was just, uncomplicated. Marcus felt jealousy twist in his gut, sharp and ugly. You slept with him. Once. Maybe 2 weeks after that night with you. We went back to his place after dinner, and I thought maybe this was what moving on felt like. But afterward, I felt nothing. No connection, no spark, just emptiness. She looked at Marcus with red-rimmed eyes. I told him I wasn't ready for a relationship, and we went our separate ways. Then a few weeks later, I missed my period, and you assumed the baby was his. I assumed it was impossible, Victoria corrected. I took 3 pregnancy tests before I believed it. Then I went to the doctor and she confirmed it. A miracle, she called it. One of those inexplicable cases where the body heals itself, or the diagnosis was incomplete, or the stars align in just the right way. She laughed bitterly. I tried to contact David to tell him, but his phone number was disconnected. The hospital where he said he worked had no record of a doctor by that name. I did some digging and realized he'd lied about almost everything. I don't even know if David was his real name. Marcus stared at her. He was married. Probably. Or maybe he just didn't want complications. Either way, he disappeared. Victoria's hand moved protectively over her belly. So I decided it didn't matter. This baby was mine. A miracle that had nothing to do with my failed marriage, or some man who couldn't even give me his real name. I could do this alone. I would do this alone. But you weren't sure, Marcus said slowly. You weren't sure if the father was me or him. The timing was so close, and given my medical history, the odds of conceiving naturally even once seemed impossible. Twice in the same month? It didn't seem possible. Victoria met his eyes. I convinced myself it had to be David's baby, because if it was yours, if it was mine, everything would get complicated. If it was yours, it would mean we'd created the child we'd wanted for so long, but only after we'd destroyed our marriage trying to have it. It would mean I'd have to come back to you, or we'd have to co-parent, or I'd spend the rest of my life tied to someone who'd seen me at my absolute lowest, someone who'd watched me fail over and over again. Her voice broke. I couldn't do it, Marcus. I couldn't face the possibility that this baby was ours when we were already over. Marcus felt tears burning in his own eyes. You didn't fail, Victoria. We failed, both of us. We let the infertility define us instead of fighting through it together. You suggested the divorce because you were breaking apart, because every day I watched you blame yourself for something that wasn't your fault, and I didn't know how to make it stop. I thought letting you go would give you peace. He reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it anyway. I never stopped loving you. Not for one day. Victoria's tears fell harder. Don't say that. It's true. The divorce was the biggest mistake of my life. And if there's even a chance this baby is ours... He stopped, his throat tight. We need to know, Victoria. We need to find out. I'm scared, she whispered. What if it's not yours? What if it's David's, whoever he really was? What if this baby comes from a lie? Then we'll figure it out. But what if it is mine? What if this is the miracle we spent years praying for and we almost missed it because we were too hurt and too proud to see it? Marcus squeezed her hand gently. Please, let me be here. Let me help, at least until we know for sure. Before Victoria could answer, the door opened and a doctor entered. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and a calm, authoritative presence. Ms. Hart, I'm Dr. Jennifer Walsh. I'm the perinatologist overseeing your care. She glanced at Marcus. And you are? Marcus Ashford. I'm Victoria's... He looked at Victoria, uncertain what to call himself. He's the father, Victoria said quietly. Possibly. We're not sure. Dr. Walsh's eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. I see. Well, Mr. Ashford, since you're here, you should know that Victoria and the baby are both stable for now, but this is a high-risk situation. 28 weeks is very early. We've administered corticosteroids to help mature the baby's lungs in case of premature delivery, and we're monitoring closely for any signs of renewed labor. What caused it? Marcus asked. The premature labor. Could be any number of factors. Stress, physical exertion, or sometimes it just happens. Victoria mentioned she's been working long hours and hasn't been sleeping well. Dr. Walsh turned to Victoria. You're going to need to be on complete bed rest. No work, minimal activity. You'll need help. Someone to cook, clean, run errands. Do you have family nearby? Victoria shook her head. My parents are in California. My sister is in Seattle. I've been managing on my own. That ends now, Dr. Walsh said firmly. For the next several weeks, until we get you to at least 34 weeks, you cannot be alone. The stress of trying to manage everything by yourself could trigger labor again. She can stay with me, Marcus said immediately. I have plenty of space and I can arrange for whatever help she needs. Nurses, a chef, whatever it takes. Marcus, no. Victoria, please. He looked at her intently. Let me do this. For you, for the baby, let me help. Victoria looked between Marcus and Dr. Walsh, clearly torn. Finally, she closed her eyes and nodded once, a tiny movement that felt like surrender. Okay, but just until the baby comes, and we're getting a paternity test. Absolutely, Marcus agreed. Whatever you want. As long as you and the baby are safe. Dr. Walsh made notes on her tablet. Good. I want to keep you here for observation for another 48 hours. If everything remains stable, you can be discharged to home bed rest. Mr. Ashford, I suggest you use that time to prepare accommodations for Ms. Hart. She'll need a comfortable space on the main floor if possible. Stairs are discouraged, and I'll have the nursing staff give you a list of warning signs to watch for. After the doctor left, Marcus and Victoria sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice exhausted. This is crazy. 2 days ago, I was alone and fine with it. Now you're moving me into your penthouse, and we're waiting to find out if you're the father of my baby. Not crazy, Marcus said softly. Just unexpected, like this whole pregnancy. He stood, still holding her hand. I'm going to take care of everything. You just rest. Focus on staying healthy and keeping that baby inside for as long as possible. What if the test says you're not the father? Victoria asked, and Marcus could hear the fear in her voice. What happens then? Marcus looked at her for a long moment, at this woman he'd loved and lost and never stopped thinking about, at the curve of her belly where a baby, maybe his baby, was fighting to grow strong enough to face the world. Then I'll help you anyway, he said simply. Because whether this baby is biologically mine or not, you're still someone I care about, someone I never should have let go, and that baby deserves the best possible start in life. He paused. But Victoria, I think we both know the truth. I think we've known it all along. Victoria's tears started again, but this time she didn't pull her hand away. She held on tight, like someone who'd been drowning and had finally found something solid to cling to. 2 days later, Marcus's driver pulled up to the hospital entrance with a wheelchair already arranged. Victoria had protested she could walk perfectly fine, but Dr. Walsh had been adamant. Every precaution mattered now. The penthouse had been transformed. Marcus had converted his spacious home office on the main floor into a temporary bedroom, complete with a hospital-grade bed that could be adjusted for comfort, a private bathroom, and enough monitors to rival the hospital. He'd hired a private nurse named Caroline, a gentlewoman in her 40s with decades of experience in high-risk pregnancies. The kitchen was now stocked with every nutritious food the nutritionist had recommended. His housekeeper, Maria, had been briefed on the situation and had promised to help with whatever Victoria needed. This is too much, Victoria said, as Marcus showed her around. She looked tiny and overwhelmed, one hand resting on her belly as she took in the expensive equipment and pristine accommodations. It's exactly enough, Marcus countered. Caroline will be here during the day. I'll be here at night. Maria can help with meals and anything else. All you have to do is rest and let that baby grow. What about your work? You can't just put your entire life on hold for me. Watch me. Marcus guided her gently to the bed. I've moved all my meetings to video calls. Anything that requires my physical presence can wait. Right now, you and this baby are my only priority. Over the next week, they fell into an unexpected routine. Marcus worked from the dining room table where he could hear if Victoria needed anything. Caroline monitored her vital signs and the baby's heartbeat several times a day. Victoria read, watched movies, and tried not to go stir-crazy from the enforced inactivity, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. Not about the paternity test, that felt too charged, too dangerous. Instead, they talked about smaller things, books they'd read, shows they'd watched. Victoria told him about her work with the non-profits, the grant proposals she'd written that had helped fund literacy programs and community gardens. Marcus told her about the Brooklyn development and how he'd decided to preserve the historic facade after all, creating affordable housing with character instead of another glass tower. "You're different," Victoria observed one evening. Marcus had brought dinner on a tray, salmon with roasted vegetables that Maria had prepared. He sat in the chair beside her bed while she ate, something that had become their habit. "How so?" "Softer, maybe. More present. Before you were always thinking 3 steps ahead, always planning the next acquisition or deal. Now you're just here." Marcus considered this. "Losing you changed me. I realized I'd been so focused on building an empire that I'd forgotten what I was building it for. What's the point of having everything if you have no one to share it with?" Victoria set down her fork. "Marcus, we need to talk about what happens after the baby comes. We can't keep avoiding it." "I know." He'd been dreading this conversation. "Have you thought about what you want?" "Honestly, I don't know. If the baby is yours, we'll have to figure out custody arrangements, co-parenting." "I'm not expecting us to just pick up where we left off. Why not?" Victoria stared at him. "What? Why couldn't we pick up where we left off? Or better yet, start over completely? Do it right this time?" Marcus leaned forward, his heart pounding. "I know I hurt you. I know I suggested the divorce when I should have fought harder for us. But Victoria, these past 2 weeks with you have been the happiest I've been in years. Not because of the baby, but because of you. Because I get to have breakfast with you and hear about your day and fall asleep knowing you're safe under the same roof. I don't want that to end. You're only saying this because I'm pregnant." "I'm saying this because I never stopped loving you," Marcus said fiercely. "The pregnancy just gave me an excuse to be near you again, to remember what we had before everything fell apart. And yes, if this baby is mine, I want to be a father. I want to be there for every feeding and diaper change and first word. But even if the test says I'm not the biological father, I still want you back. I still want us." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks. "I'm scared. What if we try again and it falls apart? What if the same problems come back?" "They won't, because we're different people now. We've both learned what it's like to lose each other, and I promise you, I will never take you for granted again." He reached for her hand. "But I'm not going to pressure you. We'll take this one day at a time. First, we get you and this baby safely to full term. Then we figure out the paternity. Then we decide what comes next. No rush, no expectations. Just honesty and time." Victoria squeezed his hand. "Okay. One day at a time." The days turned into weeks. Victoria reached 30 weeks, then 32. Each milestone was a small victory celebrated with careful optimism. Mrs. Patterson visited regularly, bringing homemade soup and gossip from the Brooklyn neighborhood. Dr. Walsh continued to monitor closely, adjusting medications and ordering additional ultrasounds. The baby was growing well, beating the odds. And through it all, Marcus and Victoria grew closer. They laughed together over silly television shows. They argued playfully about baby names. Victoria liked traditional names while Marcus preferred something more unique. They held hands during the scary moments when Victoria felt a contraction, and they had to call Dr. Walsh to make sure everything was okay. At 34 weeks, Dr. Walsh gave them cautiously good news. "You've made it past the critical period. If the baby comes now, the chances of complications are much lower. You still need to be careful, but we're in a much better position than we were 6 weeks ago." "When can we do the paternity test?" Victoria asked. She'd been bringing it up more frequently, as if needing to know before the baby arrived. "We can do a non-invasive prenatal paternity test now," Dr. Walsh said. "It just requires blood samples from both of you. Results take about a week. Are you both ready for that?" Marcus looked at Victoria. She looked back at him, and he could see the fear and hope warring in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "We're ready." The blood draw was quick and painless. Then came the hardest part, waiting. 7 days that felt like 7 years. Marcus tried to prepare himself for either outcome. If the baby was his, he'd be a father. The thought filled him with joy and terror in equal measure. If the baby wasn't his, he'd, what? Walk away? He couldn't imagine doing that now. Victoria and this baby had become part of his life again, and he didn't want to let them go. The results came on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Walsh called and asked them both to come to her office. Marcus helped Victoria into the car. She was enormous now, uncomfortable and tired and counting down the days until her due date. They rode in silence, both too nervous to speak. Dr. Walsh's office was warm and wood-paneled, designed to be calming. She gestured for them to sit and pulled up the results on her computer. Marcus felt Victoria's hand find his, gripping tight. "The test is conclusive," Dr. Walsh said. "Marcus, you are the biological father. Probability of paternity is 99.9%. The world seemed to stop. Marcus heard Victoria make a small sound. Half sob, half laugh. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He was going to be a father. This baby that Victoria had been carrying, this miracle child that had survived against all odds, was his. "Oh my God," Victoria whispered. "Oh my God, Marcus, it's yours. The baby is yours." Marcus turned to her, and suddenly they were both crying and laughing, holding each other as carefully as her pregnant belly would allow. All the pain and loss and heartbreak of the past years seemed to crystallize into this one perfect moment of clarity. They'd made this baby together during one night of desperate connection, and somehow, impossibly, it had survived when all the planned attempts had failed. "We're having a baby," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Victoria, we're having a baby." "I know," she sobbed. "I can't believe it. After everything, after all those years of trying, it was always supposed to be you and me," Marcus said. "This baby was just waiting for the right moment." Dr. Walsh discreetly left them alone for a few minutes. When she returned, she was smiling. "I have one more piece of news. The ultrasound this morning showed the baby has moved into position. Given that you're at 36 weeks now and everything looks good, we could potentially schedule a C-section for next week if you'd like, or we can wait for natural labor. It's your choice." Marcus looked at Victoria. "What do you want?" Victoria thought for a moment, then smiled. A real smile. Bright and joyful in a way Marcus hadn't seen in years. "Let's wait. This baby has beaten every odd to get here. I think we should let them decide when they're ready to meet us." 4 days later, at 3 in the morning, Victoria woke Marcus with a gentle shake. "It's time," she said, her voice calm despite the obvious contraction that made her wince. "The baby's coming." The delivery was long and difficult, but Victoria was strong. Marcus stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, falling more in love with her with every passing hour. And finally, at 2:47 p.m. on a sunny Thursday afternoon, their daughter came into the world. She was tiny but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs that she demonstrated immediately. The doctors checked her over and declared her perfect. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of absolute miracle. When the nurse placed her in Victoria's arms, Marcus watched his ex-wife, his soon-to-be wife again, if he had anything to say about it, cradle their daughter with tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect," Victoria whispered. "She's absolutely perfect." "She looks like you," Marcus said, touching one tiny hand. His daughter's fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and he felt his heart crack open, in a way he'd never experienced before. "What should we name her?" Victoria asked. They'd discussed names but never settled on one, as if they'd been waiting to meet her first. Marcus looked at his daughter, at her dark hair and tiny nose, and the way she seemed to already be studying the world with serious eyes. "Hope," he said softly. "Her name should be Hope. Because she gave us hope when we'd lost it all." Victoria's tears fell harder, but she was smiling. "Hope Victoria Ashford. It's perfect." 3 months later, Marcus and Victoria stood in a small ceremony room at City Hall, surrounded by a handful of close friends and Mrs. Patterson, who'd insisted on being there. Hope was asleep in her grandmother's arms. Victoria's mother had flown in from California and refused to leave. "This is crazy," Victoria had said that morning as she'd adjusted her simple white dress. "We're remarrying before we've even finished processing the first divorce emotionally." "Life's crazy," Marcus had replied, kissing her forehead. "But I'm not waiting another day to make you my wife again, not when I've already wasted too much time." Now, as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife for the second time, Marcus pulled Victoria close and kissed her with all the love and gratitude and wonder he'd been holding in his heart. They'd lost each other once, but they'd found their way back, and this time they'd build their life on stronger foundations, on honesty and communication, and the knowledge that some miracles were worth waiting for. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked when they finally pulled apart. Victoria looked at Hope, now awake and watching them with wide, curious eyes. Then she looked at Marcus, and her smile was radiant. "Yes, let's go home." They walked out of City Hall into the bright afternoon sunshine, a family bound not just by biology, but by choice. The future stretched before them, uncertain and beautiful and full of possibility. And for the first time in years, Marcus felt complete. Sometimes the greatest love stories weren't about finding someone new. Sometimes they were about finding your way back to the person you'd never stopped loving. And sometimes, against all odds and medical predictions, miracles happened when you least expected them. Marcus had found his ex-wife pregnant 6 months after their divorce, and in doing so he'd found his way back to love, to family, to everything that truly mattered. The billionaire who'd built an empire had discovered that his greatest treasure had been there all along, waiting for him to be brave enough to claim it.